Shana Tova. I've had varied learning experiences from a variety of unlikely sources this summer. For example, in a dining hall in a dude ranch in Du Bois, Wyoming, I met Chris Cox, owner of the Triangle C Ranch. He officially teaches horsemanship, but really teaches relationship building. He challenged his guests with the following question. In his native Texas twang, he asked us, "What would you say is the appropriate age to let your kids start handling a chainsaw?" We were shocked by the question as we tried to picture our children wielding a limb-losing chainsaw. Most of us answered, "Never." A few answered 16. One said 18. And then our host whipped out an iPhone. It's okay to touch it because an iPhone is machzor, but this is a picture of an iPhone, so it's okay. He whipped out an iPhone and he said, "While most of you would take extreme precautions with a chainsaw, most of you find this iPhone harmless. Well, I'll say to you, this little device, which most of you would not bat an eye to put in the hands of an 8-year-old, is potentially far more dangerous than a chainsaw, yet you unwilling it put it in the hands of your kids." But there's more. He went on, "Never mind the addictive nature of the iPhone, where kids will while away countless hours in front of that screen to the exclusion of everything else. But kids have access to pornography and all sorts of other horrible ideas that you have no idea because you can't see the screen. And all your ability to carry on a proper conversation at the dinner table is lost as our kids type out 144-character tweets. Thanks to the iPhone, our kids are losing the ability to communicate." How ironic that the telephone, a device meant to facilitate communication, might actually be responsible for the demise of communication. Perhaps on this new year, we should think about how do we use communication to connect with one another, and how might we do it better? An inspiration comes in part from the Hebrew word for communication and in part from the great irony of today's Torah reading. The Hebrew word for communication is tikshoret. Every Hebrew word has a 3-letter shoresh, or a root, which gives us a sense of what the word means to convey. The 3-letter consonant shoresh of the word tikshoret is kuf, shin, and resh. These 3 letters form the word kesher, or connection. The Hebrew makes the point that for communication to be effective, it must create a connection between two people. The great tragedy in this morning's Torah reading is Abraham's failure to communicate with Sarah in what will be the greatest decision of his life, Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, and the near murder of Isaac. In Parshat Lech Lecha, Abraham is promised 2 things by God. 1, land, and 2, peoplehood. The only avenue for peoplehood would be through Isaac. This miracle child was born to Sarah at the age of 90, long after the time of fertility. She laughed in joy and disbelief when she learned of her pregnancy. And the fact that the name for Isaac means laughter proves Jewish comedy is almost as old as the origins of our religion itself. If ever there was a time for communication between husband and wife, it was now. At the moment when Abraham thought he understood God to be commanding he sacrifice Isaac's life atop Mount Moriah. But Abraham fails to communicate. The rabbis, in biblical commentary called Midrash, reflect that because of his failure to communicate, Sarah dies of a broken heart. They say that her heart-rending threefold scream is forever captured in the broken Shavarim Torah blast, which you just heard. Our Torah portion this morning comes to teach us that effective, face-to-face communication can be a matter of life and death. Yet our high-tech communication devices and platforms, personal communication is at its lowest. I fear that we become absolutely reckless of how we communicate, or we don't communicate at all. It is no longer strange to see two people at the same lunch table at noontime sitting across from one another in absolute silence as they each text to other people. You may have seen that. I've seen that. I may have done it myself. Despite laws and fines, how many of us are still prone to checking our texts on our iPhones at red lights, or even answering those texts and instant messages while cruising down I-95? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here. I fear that our reliance on instant messaging or Snapchat or Facebook replies and texting have robbed us, and especially our children, of the ability to carry on intelligent conversations, or even our patience to sit through a high holiday sermon. 144 characters is becoming our maximum ability to exchange ideas, given the artificial limits imposed by Twitter. Science bears me out. Previously, when you wanted to get from point A to point B, and you were unaware of your surroundings, you took out do you remember? What was that thing called? A map. Right? By a show of hands, how many of you remember using a Thomas McNally map book or the equivalent sometime in your life? Baruch Hashem, hands down. All right. When I was a young teen, my dad would put the McNally book of maps on my lap as he drove, telling me I was only allowed to make 2 mistakes per year. Talk about pressure. But my brain developed in ways which, according to the latest science, Waze and Google Maps will just not allow. Without proper exercise, our brains are deadening. The technology is convenient, but it comes at a terrible price. Too many times, I made life far more difficult for myself and others in this congregation when I've relied on an email, normally written far too late at night, to address issues better handled face to face. We think we are saving time by using emails. But if communication is 80% nonverbal, then all those nuances conveyed by tone of voice, facial expressions, and pausing are all lost. Not only that, but emails are very one-sided. You don't have the chance to hear what the other person is saying in response to your email. You don't have the chance to rephrase something which you know was misperceived by the receiver of your email. Now, and I speak from experience here, you find yourself writing an apology email, or in my case, a series of apology emails for the first email, which was received poorly. So when it comes to difficult subjects, emails can actually cost us far more time than they save. And they can even cost us friendships. In today's polarized society, people tend to talk at each other rather than to each other. I do believe Marshall McLuhan's got it right when he said, the medium is the message. It is just a short jump from blasting angry emails at one another or writing angry political rants on Facebook to simply not being able to hear anyone with a different point of view than your own. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of Great Britain, is worried about social media breaking down our ability to build relationships with those different than ourselves. During a recent TED Talk, I referenced it the other day, he shared the following personal story. And here I get to channel my inner Rabbi Sacks, given my British roots. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was a 20-year-old undergraduate studying philosophy. I was into Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Sartre and Camus. I was full of ontological uncertainty and existential angst. It was terrific. And was self-obsessed and thoroughly unpleasant to know, until one day I saw across the courtyard a girl who was everything that I was not. She radiated sunshine. She emanated joy. I found out her name was Elaine. We met, we talked, we married. And 47 years, 3 children, and 8 grandchildren later, I can safely say it was the best decision I ever took in my life, because it's the people not like us that make us grow. Rabbi Sacks makes the point that the trouble with Google filters, Facebook friends, and reading the news by narrowcasting rather than by broadcasting means that we're surrounded almost entirely by people like us, whose views, opinions, even whose prejudices are just like ours. Cass Sustin of Harvard has shown that if we surround ourselves with people with the same views as us, we get more extreme. We need to renew those face-to-face encounters with the people not like us. I think we need to do that in order to realize that we can disagree strongly and still stay friends. Rabbi Sacks says, look at the British accent only one more time now. It's in those face-to-face encounters that we discover that the people not like us are just people like us. Actually, every time we hold out the hand of friendship to somebody not like us, whose color, whose class, or creed are different from ours, we heal one of the fractures of our wounded world. That is the us in the word relationship. I completely concur with Rabbi Sacks. The problem is that those face-to-face encounters take time. And our technological-driven forms of communication today argue against investing time. All our modern technologies of the post-World War II era, from microwaves to TV dinners, were designed to save us time. Save us time for what? Perhaps to have more time to spend with family, with friends. But as our communication technologies have advanced, we tend to spend less, not more, face-to-face time together. By a show of hands, how many of you in your teenage years used to get yelled at for spending too much time tying up the family phone, speaking to your friends? All right. Again, we kind of age ourselves when we answer these questions. In my house, long before call waiting, voicemail, or even a second line, there was just one family phone line. I feel like such a dinosaur. God. If you were on the phone, it rang busy for everyone else. How many important phone calls did my parents think they were missing? It wasn't as if Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan were frequent phone callers to our house phone. But you would have thought so with that oft-repeated phrase in my house, Michael, get off the phone. I heard it more than the Shema. Elisa and I have admonished our teenage girls for many things, but I promise you, we have never, ever scolded them for tying up the family phone, because they are never on it. Certainly they communicate with their friends, but I never hear my daughter's voices. Almost all communication is conducted through instant messaging. One finger for me. And the keypads on their smartphones and iPads are very quiet. Gone are the days of playing in the street. Children, including our own, are sedentary, locked away in bedrooms. No one is making time for face-to-face encounters. I am telling you, this is not a new thing. Returning to our parashah, the greatest tragedy in today's reading is that Abraham did not make time to speak to his wife Sarah before taking their only child atop that lonely mountain. If ever someone needed to invest time in face-to-face communication with his wife, it was Abraham. This may have led to the death of his wife. I fear that lack of basic communications leads to the death of many marriages today. Let us resolve in this new year to invest more time in face-to-face communication. Let us use emails only for positive or neutral communication, saving more sensitive or passion-filled communication for phone calls or face-to-face meetings. Perhaps in this new year, we can actually commit to adding more coffee meetings, lunch meetings in our cafeterias or break rooms, more after-work dates with our spouses, family dinners spent in conversation, after-dinner walks with friends. Add it all to our weekly planning schedules, because that's the only way it's going to happen. This proposal will not only work if we deliberately schedule time, but it will mean breaking old habits and unfortunately bucking social trends. I would like to make the first move this morning. I'm going to ask Pam, our front office manager, to make time for any of you who would like to meet for coffee or lunch, morning, midday, or afternoon. And I'd like it to be a priority on my schedule. We can talk about whatever you please. I'm interested in knowing all of you better and being there for you. And there's no better way to achieve this than through investing quality time in face-to-face conversation. I look forward to seeing you soon as we learn to connect better to one another through communication. Lehitraot. I'll see you soon.